Hi everybody, it's Tanya with the product management team. Welcome to the Practitioners Forum, and today's session is focusing on SMAX Studio best practices. I'm joined by Brindusha and Steve. The sessions, the best practice sessions, we do a couple different types of meetings in the Practitioners Forum. Sometimes we're presenting best practices, sometimes we're doing a technical drill down, often it's office hours where you can drop in with any questions, and we generally meet every 2 weeks. The best practice sessions are specifically to talk about how to implement something and things to consider, lessons learned. Often it's us presenting to you based on what we found from the projects or from the designs. Today we're trying to mix it up a little bit and we're asking for some audience participation. Some of you got requests from us, well, from me and Brindusha probably, just recently to share your studio best practices with us. And we'll do some of that via slides, some of it just will poll the audience. This particular session is a little different from what we normally do. It's less formal, and our plan is to collect some more information from you based on your early work with Studio, and then we can update either this presentation or into the documentation. At the end of the call, we'll just talk briefly about the upcoming sessions. There's an important one coming up in January, and then I want to tell you a little bit about a Studio and OO integration challenge. Right, I think we've taken care of that. So just while you're thinking about your Studio best practices, and this could be as you're designing an app that's going into production, or you're doing the work to build it, or maybe you've already put one into production. What are some things that you would like to share, wish you had known then what you know now? And we'll see if there's anything from the audience. We did have one of our partners, EOH, submit one in advance. And is anyone from EOH on the phone? Chris, who submitted it, is in a different time zone. No, okay, so I said that we would cover this slide for EOH. Again, our intention is to collect a few of these stories, so if you want to take a moment to read this one and then also think about what you might share, and then Brindusha's got some slides based on our experiences. But this was based on a timesheet application that that EOH created. Brindusha or Steve, I can go through this slide, or folks can read it. I don't know if you know anything specifically in talking to EOH.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, and we'll be sharing these. But what they've provided is a few slides to show us how they use Studio to set up some time tracking, and we'll go back a little bit against activities. So this was more of a sort of an approach best practice, how they went about meeting a specific requirement. And just before I go on to some slides from Brindusha, I'll turn it over to the audience to see if there's anyone who wants to come off mute, or maybe that's probably better than chatting it into the chat. In terms of your best practices, lessons learned, things to consider as it relates to Studio. Is there anyone in the audience who wanted to share anything? I know it's a challenge to come off of mute on these shared calls. So we'll turn it over to Brindusha, and then as after Brindusha's slides, we'll do a couple of, we'll come back to you. But you can see the format here that EOH has provided. That's really quite simply what we're looking for. So again, as you're designing an app, as you were building it, or as you rolled it out into production, what are some of the things that you'd like to share, things that you learned, maybe a particular challenge that you were able to solve, and you can just put it into this slide format, and then we'll happily share it, either anonymously or not. We're happy to take things in and put your name on it or not. Just let us know. Okay, so Brindusha, I will turn it over to you.
I think you have one more slide there that illustrates the EOH implementation. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I had popped that up for a minute,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Okay.
I think it'll be easier to digest once they receive the slides.
Yep. Okay. Good. So then you can go to the next slide.
Okay, and wasn't sure. Now, actually, before we jump into that, or maybe you were going to do this, Brindusha, sort of poll the audience to see about your SMAX Studio experience. And this you could just put into the chat, but would you say that you know, a beginner, you don't know really anything about it versus you've got some experience and you know the basics of the studio? If you could chat in your answer. And then Steve or Brindusha, you can, well, actually, I
Make
might be
sure
able to.
you chat to everyone, right? Not just
Right. I could pop that up, I think. So make sure you change your drop down to everyone. So for folks on the call, we just need you to say, you're a beginner, you don't know the basics, or you're familiar with the studio basics. We got a shy audience here today. So Brindusha, for the record, why don't you go through the slides from top to bottom, and then I think that will make for a good recording.
Okay, sure. Okay. So by now probably everybody has heard about the SMAX Studio, and this is really the place to provide the codeless administration of new and existing applications. It is something that has been in the product for the existing application for a while under the records menu, which has now been renamed to the Studio and extended to allow the creation of new applications as well, plus additional functionality for both the existing and new application. So the flow is very simple. We start by creating a new application with new entries. We create the new data model. We create the application forms, the workflow, and once these 3 steps are done, you have the application ready to go. So the tools we're using are the same as for the out-of-the-box applications. We use the tabs well known for adding fields, for updating the forms, and then for defining the workflows. Next slide, please. So main use cases we have is to create a new user-defined process-based application. And this is, in this case, we add a new record type, fully enabled through user-defined workflow, the data model, the business rules, the notification, and everything. So you start building your application from scratch with all the relevant aspects. The second use case is the creation of a supporting table to be used on an existing application. So this is usually an extension of an existing application. Then can be a situation where you need to do some lookups, for example. And then the third use case is the expansion of codeless configuration feature for existing applications. And you will see some examples. And for example, you can do, I would say, custom actions. And I think we had discovered in one of the previous sessions with Dean showing some examples of escalating an incident, for example. So next slide, please. So how does it work? We create new tables with form workflows and business rules. So these are the three main steps which need to be done in order to be able to activate a new application. So this is the minimum we need to do. But then in addition to that, we can create one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many links between tables. We can have approvals added to the new processes in different phases. Additional capabilities with custom actions invoking business rules. And as well, we have the building blocks to define service level targets by adding the start, stop, and suspend condition in different phases, which then allow the calculation of the targets. Next slide, please. So we already mentioned it, but these are really the building blocks, so we'll not spend more time on this. You can just go to the next slide, Tonya. We have the approval, so same as for some of the existing out-of-the-box entities like request, we do have an approval definition tab where we can create, in this case, custom approval definitions at the governance level, right, which would apply then to all the all the records in that entity. Next slide. And then the custom action, and here is an example. And if you check the checkbox for enable the workflow, this then will allow to define business rules attached to the relevant custom actions. Next slide. And this is the service level management tab where we can define if the service level target is enabled based on is enabled and then is defined based on service priority or group information. So any fields of these types will then can be included, selected from the drop-down list. Okay, next slide. So this is where I want to spend some time, and it's really about the best practices. So what is very important is to take the time to design the application and don't rush into the implementation. I've done a number of applications. I've tried to implement some use cases, and what I learned from doing this is that the planning phase is very important. You need to spend the time, discuss with your team, try to understand the use cases, and write down what the requirements are, what the fields are, what the relations are, before you jump into actually, adding them into the application. It doesn't take too long to implement, but you have to do the planning up front. Otherwise, you will have to, do almost something that's going to come up and you realize you haven't considered. So define the data model up front. Try to use naming conventions. Come up with your own naming convention, but try to be consistent because otherwise, over time, it will be hard to maintain. You will not remember what the fields were if you don't do proper, good naming convention there. And as with custom fields, you add it on the out-of-the-box entities. The keys cannot be changed later. The display labels, the multilingual labels can be changed, but not the keys. Additionally, if you create many-to-many relations between the entities, this cannot be deleted. So it's important to think about what you need so you don't create unnecessary many-to-many relations. Decide on the primary key for an entity as it cannot be changed later. So you have the option to have, you have three possibilities when you create an entity. You can have no primary key, and by default then it relies on just the ID. So most of the time this situation would be used when you have I would say the equivalent of a transactional type of entity, right? Like think about request, incident, etc., right? So if you create an entity which has a transactional role, then don't select the primary key. There is no need for that. The second option is to have a primary key, which is the display label. So you would select this when you're trying to have the equivalent maybe of an asset, right, or people or something similar, where it's important and you want to be able to look up by that display label to find the record. So in this case, select the display label. An alternative is to use a custom field as the primary key. You can do that if you prefer, rather than use the display label, but you still have to fill in the display label and probably add a business rule, which would then copy the custom field value into the display label system field. Also very important to decide on the workflow metaphases. These cannot be changed later, so you need to know upfront what type of what metaphases you want your workflow to include. And this is, and if you are familiar with SMAX, we're talking just about the metaphases, right? The phases themselves, they are configurable. You can add them later, you can change them later, you can remove a phase, but the metaphases are need to be defined upfront. By default, and to keep consistent with the behavior out of the box, you can turn on this capability, but by default is off, is to enable custom entity links to any out-of-the-box entity. So by default, you can add an entity link to a person or group, but if you turn on this this flag in the application settings, then you are able to link to any of the out-of-the-box entities. And last but not least, and this is more of it depends on your use case. If the application you are using, it's something that needs to be visible to the end users, then you need to consider the relevant offerings to be added to the catalog. And as part of these offerings, you will create the relevant task plans to allow you to basically create a record in this new application or update a record in the application. For the creation, you can just use the business rule to create a record from record. If you need to update an existing record from this custom application, then you need to add a field of type entity link in the request module, which then will be used as the vehicle for finding the relevant record in the custom application and updating it. Okay, and I think that's what I have on the best practices.
Thanks, Prandusha. I think that will save people a lot of time if they haven't gone down this path before. One question on your second last bullet about deciding whether to enable. Is there downside to enabling it?
Oh no, there is no downside. It's more of it's a different behavior than before. So we just wanted to add this tenant setting to be able to preserve the previous behavior, but you can enable it.
Okay, great. Any questions for Prandusha or other things that you'd like to suggest adding to the list?
I have a technical question, Tanya, for Prandusha.
Hey, Casey.
Hi.
Sure.
Prandusha, the last line, the entity link from request. So last month I did that. I linked, from a request, they can open a record to the new supporting table.
Right.
And I don't know if I did something wrong or is it just a trick to turn it on, but from the new supporting table, because there's already a request number that I linked to it, I wanted to link or click on a link that will come back to that request. And I couldn't get that to work. There's no link to come back. I would assume that would automatically be done, but and I tried creating an entity link from that new table to the request, and I couldn't go back the other way. So I don't know if that was a known thing or if there's a way to make that work. And not just not just to a request, but any other table. So I can't link from my new table to whatever table that I want to get to. So didn't know if something that I did on my end. But if it's something that maybe you can look at and get back to me later, that would be great too. It was just the one thing that I couldn't figure out to do.
Thoughts on that, Prandusha or Steve?
When you say link, you mean a many-to-many relation?
I did a, what was it? Yeah, I think it was a many-to-many, or it could be a one, and I don't remember. So it was just basically when you create a new record from service catalog, it opens up that request, and that request opened up a new record in my table.
Mm-hmm.
But if I was to go to the new table, I want to see what request it was. I can see the request
I see,
number.
I see. Okay,
yeah.
okay. So I think it depends how your business rule was created in the fulfillment plan, because you have two options. You have the option to create a record, and you have the option to create a record plus relationship. So you have two business rules, right? And if you just say create a record, it will create a record and it will not link it. But if you select the one with the relation, then it will automatically create that relation.
Oh, okay. So that's probably what it was. Okay, because I can see it, and I can see the hyperlink, but I can't click on it. Okay, so that's probably what it was. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Casey. Anyone else? Okay, well, we would appreciate you sharing with us your lessons learned. I know that some items on this list are going to be, as I said, time savers for folks. So thanks for sharing, Prandusha. I'll just wrap up here with two things. One is to announce, and some of you may have been on meetings last week that I referred to this, is a SMAX challenge. So for our upcoming user conferences, we have one in February in Phoenix, Arizona, and one in May in Vienna. And May, thank you. So February in Phoenix, and I'm glad you're listening, and March in Vienna. And we'll be obviously planning for lots of customer presentations, but some of the micro-focus work we'd like to share with the audience your SMAX Studio and SMAX OO integration use cases. And we want to do that to sort of generate an inventory of some use cases and some interesting ways of solving meeting requirements. And we thought the best way to do that would be to start a contest. So we're asking customers, partners, but also our employees on behalf of their customers to share just ideas or POCs or production-ready SMAX Studio user-defined apps and SMAX OO flows or OO integrations. So that's one of the reasons why we chose the topic that we did today of Studio best practices, is to get you thinking about how to solve a business requirement, something that's not met with out-of-the-box functionality, and how you could solve that with the SMAX Studio. And we'd love to hear about your results. Again, it could be just an idea, a well-thought-through idea, a POC, or a production-ready example. And our intention is to collect these submissions and then showcase the top items at the actual user conference and provide a way for the participants to vote. So we're looking for, again, Studio or SMAX OO integrations. Examples, we can, let me just get my pointer here. We'll be looking for integrations and Studio apps targeted at IT, but also LOB. And then again, don't have to be in production or fully baked. Vision is something you could submit as well. And we'll be looking at things like the business value, the vision, execution, how far along, is it ready to go? Is it ready to be implemented at other customers? And your creativity and your use of the out-of-the-box codeless capabilities. So we are looking to have all of these submissions in by January 18th, and we'd need a 3-minute video, 5-minute video. If it's a POC or in production, obviously if it's just vision, you can't provide that. But then also some sort of description, and I can provide a template for that. I haven't done that yet. And then, of course, you need to agree for us to show it at the Universe and Summit events. And, we can do it anonymously as well if you don't want your name in headlines. So if you're interested in participating, if you could just drop me a line and let me know that you're planning to, and that's not a commitment, I understand things can change, but we want to get a sense for how many we might be receiving. That's going to help us determine how to set up the voting and how to show them during the actual events. So email me and let me know if you plan to submit one for the Studio app or the SMAX OO integration, and then also whether or not you're planning on attending those events. You don't need to be there in person in order to make a submission. So hopefully we've got some creative juices flowing after Brandusha's best practices lists and information about the Studio, and that you're already thinking about what kinds of things you can submit. Last thing for today is our upcoming practitioner forum sessions. So our January 2nd session will be canceled given the holidays. Most people hopefully will be out enjoying their time off work, or if you're at work, you'll enjoy less email because most of your colleagues are out. And then on January 16th, we'll have a similar session to today, and instead of SMAX Studio, we're looking at SMAX implementation best practices and lessons learned. And we'd like to take the same approach as we did today, and we've got a little more runway for you to collect your thoughts and submit them so that we can share them. We'll asking our customers, partners, and our microfocus employees to share with us best practices and lessons learned from a SMAX implementation. So again, things that you wish you'd known then, or things to be on the lookout for, or as some of the things in Brandusha's list, just key capabilities that maybe aren't obvious at first. So I ask you to submit those to me and we'll compile them. Again, you can share them in an anonymous way if you like. And then we haven't planned the topic for our next session. Recordings for best practice sessions and technical drill downs are on the forum. And lastly is, do you have an idea, a configuration use case, something that you'd like to share, new capabilities that you're exploring and wish you had more best practices on, any topic for future meetings, let me know, please. And with that, I will say thank you for joining. Thanks, Brandusha, for the presentation, and enjoy the rest of your day.